and I'm one of your co-hosts here tonight. And I just want to welcome you on behalf of the People-Pueblo Party. We're here every Monday night at 8 p.m. Live on YouTube, and also recorded. We go on Facebook. We put the recording up. And this week, we'll also be able to put our videos up on our brand new website, which will be published this week. We're going to keep you up to date on that. And we've always said that even during the COVID pandemic, if you want to save lives, you have to take action. It's not enough to know what's going on, but you have to take action to save lives. And we're also sponsored by the People's Health Project Incorporated. They make it possible for us to have the software and hardware we need to have our show. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Bill to come on and to do a welcome and to greet y'all. And then we'll go into our COVID update. So Bill, you're on, so you can welcome the audience.
Yeah, I want to welcome everyone to People's TV Live and Uncensored. And I want to start today a little different than we do in the past. I want to start today with actually doing some libation. And why do we do libation today? Because today is African American Memorial Day. So therefore, we call upon our ancestors to join us as they impart their wisdom to lead us as we look upon them for guidance, not just for us, but also for our unborn, that they are to come. Because we know that on this day, this month in particular, May 1st, 1865, it was the first observance of Memorial Day. And that was done by African Americans, by free enslaved African Americans. And they decorated the graves of their felon heroes. And it was so that their story would be told, so that they wouldn't be forgotten. And it's also a dual memorial because on this day, we also know that 100 years ago, which we will get into in detail, that the atrocity that was tried to cover up by American, that was fell upon the African American influenced town of Greenwood. So with no further ado, because of this, I want to pour a libation and tribute to the fallen ones. And when I want you to join in by saying Ashe, which means that you're in an agreement with what I'm saying. So we pour libation for those that gave their life unknowingly on this day 100 years ago. Ashe. And I want those in the sound of my voice, those near and far, and those that I can see and hear, and those that I can't. And we pour libation for our unborn children, so that they know that they are important, that their lives are meaningful. Ashe. We pour libation as we ask for our ancestors to join us, because we know all they endured, we know the wisdom that they bring, and we know that they're here in our presence. So we welcome them, because we know that we couldn't get as far as we could without leaning upon them then and now and in the future. Ashe. And we also ask that our ancestors look favorably upon us as we go into this presentation today, and we teach people some things that maybe they did not know, and we learn something anew ourselves. So that I say Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. And at this time, I will turn the program back over to Brother Mark.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Wonderful. Also tonight we have Joe Kay. He has been in a struggle for over 6 decades. And for y'all don't know what a decade is, that's 10 years. So that's over 60 years against U.S. wars of aggression and solidarity with peoples targeted by U.S. imperialist domination and world hegemony, against the Cold War as well as the new Cold War, against systematic racism and the underlying economic root of all social injustice. Joe is the author of the book, The Crime of Impunity, The Crime of Punishment, which you can get online, is readily available online, which documents that 95% of all the crime, including those crimes which have the most devastating social consequences, are committed by rich white men for which they never serve a single day behind bars. Okay, so welcome, Joe. Normally at this time we do an update on COVID, stop COVID update, and so we're gonna bring you back on to have discussion. I mean, unless there's some, you want to say hi to folks now and stuff, and then we'll jump into the topic of the evening.
No, greetings to you, Mark, and to William, and to the listening audience.
Hey,
Good evening.
greetings.
All right, thank you. So what I'm going to do is we usually do a news update because in the news we do have the issue of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. We're just going to do the COVID piece of it tonight and not the other pieces. So basically, I've been watching the development of COVID. I recommended a book for everyone to read, which is called How to Survive a Pandemic by Dr. Michael Greger. And we've been watching it and not listening to Fauci or people here who are tied to the corporations and the billionaires. One day they say don't wear a mask, next day they say wear a mask, next day they say don't wear a mask. And so we have about 600,000 deaths in this country, twice the number that Fauci and company thought would be the number of deaths before they can come up with a vaccine. And we saw examples of China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Cuba, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, how they control the virus and minimize the number of infections and deaths through regular public health measures, social distancing, wearing masks, shutting things down when they needed to be shut down. And also they would provide people with income when they shut them down so that nobody would have to suffer hardship. So in this country, they decided not to put in the public health measures because they don't want to invest in the public health sector. We live in a neoliberal capitalist society where they promote this idea that the market can solve all the problems, and we know it can't. The only problem the market can solve is to make the rich already richer, right? And make things worse for everybody else, for the middle class, poor people, working people. But what we did see around December, and I have here, it's hard to see, a spike in COVID cases in Vietnam. Now we're talking about them having 200 cases, which is not much of a spike, right? Cuba also had a spike. South Korea, Japan is going through it right now. They're thinking of canceling the Olympics. And what it looks like is that the countries that instituted public health measures, testing, tracing, quarantining, right away got to jump on it. They took action to save lives. But as these other countries that didn't do that, started to travel vac, and that vaccine is being used in poorer countries, including and in China and Dominican Republic. Everybody is using Sinovac. They're not using Pfizer. They're not using Moderna because those are too expensive. So the Chinese have worked it out so that poor countries can get access to vaccines. And Cuba is also rolling out 3 different types of vaccines that are going to be primarily for poorer countries that can't afford Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson, can't afford to deal with those companies and their patents. So what it looks like is, from what I'm looking at, just following it from last year, is that the beginning of last year is that public health measures need to be instituted to save lives. But in order to maintain the infection rate low or down to 0, you do need vaccines, right? Now, I know Bill doesn't want to take the vaccine. I understand it completely. There's a history here of Tuskegee. There's La Operación en Puerto Rico, sterilization of women, which also happened here. But what it looks like internationally is that the dual strategy of, which is what China's doing, right? China is instituting aggressive public health measures, testing, tracing, quarantining, and also they've developed their own vaccine, and their rates are still zero or close to zero. So it looks like that 1-2 punch is very, very effective for dealing with COVID and other infectious viruses. So I'm just going to open it up. Maybe we can have a short discussion, then jump into our main topic for tonight. Joe or Bill or Joe, anybody want to chime in on this?
The only thing I'll say is I agree with Mark. I'm not interested in taking the vaccine. I dispute it in its theory as actually even being a vaccine, to be honest with you. And the skepticism of me not taking it hasn't diminished, it has increased because I tell you, either they did not know that you was gonna have to take a booster shot before a year's period was up. They say now an 8 or 10 month period after it because it's the effect that it starts to wane. And if they didn't know, then that's the reason, more of a reason why they shouldn't have waived the 2 year period, trial period. And if they did know, that's even enhanced the reason why people like myself is skeptical to begin with. So if they didn't know, why didn't they know? And if they did know, why didn't they willingly tell you? My conspiracy theory, based on their history, not just being a conspiracist, is that they felt that once people took the shot, that they'd be more inclined to take up the backup shot versus to if they told them from the beginning, it would have stymied a lot of people from taking it. And any time that they would go to the black and the brown community, aka charter schools, and put us first, then you got to be skeptical from that in itself. And I say that to compare with the fact that states like Ohio are giving out $1 million lotteries to take the COVID. And now states like New York, Cuomo's follow suit, another state has too. They're giving out, I think it's 54 year total 4 year paid scholarship to go to Cooney school system. Why, if something is so fundamentally good for you, do we have to throw in all of these extravagant free gifts to entice people? It should be merit based because people got common sense. Like like Mark says, common sense politics for common sense people, the people, the planet, and the earth. So it puts question marks there. And I'm just going to continue to self-medicate and take care of myself as if I caught the flu or if I caught a cold or anything else.
Joe, do you have any thoughts?
I don't have any medical expertise or health expertise. I would just say that I certainly understand where William is coming from. It goes way beyond Tuskegee. It's right up to the present day, the racist character of our healthcare system, of the way doctors treat black and brown people as opposed to white people, right up to the present day, can certainly explain a lot of the skepticism about pronouncements from medical authorities. But in general, I would have to say that I agree with you, Mark, in the importance of both the kind of healthcare measures you're talking about, the prophylactic measures, and the vaccines as well.
Thank you, fellas. So tonight, Bill, I know you're going to you have a little intro for us around the Black Wall Street. I also have a clip from the Smithsonian, which is very beautiful. It's beautiful. I've never seen it before. Maybe other people have seen it. So did you want me to show the clip first, Bill? Or did you want to do your intro of the Tulsa Massacre?
How do you feel that you want to run it? It doesn't matter.
Okay, so I'm just going to show the video first, and then I'm gonna give you the floor, and you could intro the main topic for tonight. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to mute all of us so that we don't get a bad echo for the audience.
In the 20s, the country is flourishing. Some African American communities are prospering, like the residents of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A remarkable Baptist pastor named Solomon Sir Jones is the pioneering filmmaker. His footage was lost for more than 50 years. Jones captures the bustling life of Greenwood, which could be any American small town. But Tulsa's whites don't like what they see. In May 1921, after a black man is accused of assaulting a white woman, a white mob rampages through the city. For a night and a day, they loot and burn Greenwood. A Fox News crew captures the only surviving footage. It is the bloodiest racial massacre in American history, leaving nearly 300 dead.
Okay, so that short video is just like 2 minutes. It kind of gives you a visual representation of what happened. But Bill, I guess you can come on now and give us a little bit more information.
Yeah, back in 1921, Glenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was prospering. There was an enclave where it was several, I guess, thousands of affluent, well-to-do African Americans. They had their own movie theater, their own churches, the grocery stores. They had their own businesses. They had their own zip code. They had everything that white people would accuse us of not having later and often. Why don't you do this for yourself? Why don't you do better for yourself? When in actuality, they just said that as a convenience. They never really wanted us to. And the jealousy, they was looking for opportunity. Now, it reminds you a little bit of Emmett Till. I mean, was that a true story? With Emmett Till, was that a true story? In Tulsa. It was just a creative story that was overblown as an opportunity to destroy everything that white folks was jealous of. And I say that because they deputized the folks. These people didn't have experience in law enforcement. The government gave them machine guns, handguns. They had low-flying planes. They were defenseless. They did everything they could to wipe them out in totality. As a matter of fact, I want to read something. I want to read something by the oldest existing person in Tulsa that's still alive today, and her name is Viola Fletcher, and she is the oldest, and this is something that she wrote because she testified. I think it was last month into subcommittee in Washington D.C. It was her first time going. It was three of them. It was her. It was another person named Lester, I can't remember the last name, and her brother. The other person was 106 years old. And her brother was 100 years old. And this is what she said. She said, "The neighborhood I fell asleep in that night was rich, not just in terms of wealth, but in culture and heritage. My family had a beautiful home. We had great neighbors. I had friends to play with. I felt safe. I had everything a child could need. I had a bright future." Within a few hours, Fletcher said, all of that was gone. And then she starts to talk about her account. And everybody that preceded her talked about the same account of the day. They talk about today, to this day, how they still remember and they still see the faces of the dead bodies. They still see the carnage. And one of the atrocities they did was when they had all these hundreds of people that died and the tens of thousands of people that became homeless. They threw the bodies in the water. It was such mass killing that they threw the body in the water. And and this is another attempt that America did, just like we talked about with Memorial Day. Was it no? Excuse me, Labor Day, May Day, aka Labor Day. How it's celebrated as Labor Day on May 1st everywhere but in the United States because they try to cover up their past. And the same thing happened when Timothy McVeigh in 1995 decided to bomb the federal building. It brought up America's dark secret that wasn't known to many, but it was known to many African Americans and many activists, aka activators. And I like to say activators because a German guy gave me that title one time because when you activate things, you get things to move. You bring life to things. When a woman activates her hair, they bring life to their hair. And so what ended up happening was it brought that to the forefront because the arrogance of America, this was basically white people that Timothy McVeigh ended up killing. And they talked about as being the biggest mass murderer in Tulsa's history. And what did that do? That gave the opportunity for historians and survivors to pounce on that and say, oh, no, 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 no. Let's not forget what happened in Tulsa. And we're still suffering from generational wealth that was taken from us. And I like these examples to be brought out the same way as the opportunity to talk about Memorial Day. Just like we talked about the pandemic. We talked about there was a dual pandemic. There's a corona pandemic, COVID pandemic, and there was a pandemic in the movement of social awareness. And the same thing can be said today, 100 years later. And we have the blessings of having eyewitnesses that were children to still tell the story. And I will stop at that point and let Mark and Joe and thank you, Mark.
Right. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that. Our audience is important for them to hear this because, I'm a high school teacher and they don't teach this. They don't teach it. They don't mention it at all. So I think that us bringing it here, and I've included it in my curriculum for this week. We need to do more of this. Joe, what do you think?
Well, I have some prepared remarks about this that I'd like to read, if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah, let's go for it, man.
So we commemorate today the 100th anniversary of what is often mistakenly referred to as the Tulsa Race Riot, some of whose events William has just recounted for us. To begin with, it wasn't a race riot, but a genocidal attack on Tulsa's black residents, masterminded by Tulsa's white power structure. In Eastern Europe, such an attack would be called a pogrom, the term used to describe the massacres of Jews, supposedly spontaneously carried out by anti-Semitic mobs, but actually engineered by the authorities. Secondly, the Tulsa massacre was not a spontaneous reaction to an alleged fraternization between a black man and a white woman, the usual excuse for lynchings and mob violence. For the massacre had been long prepared. Its real motivation was white determination to annex Greenwood, the black district, because of the soaring value of local real estate. For Tulsa had become the epicenter of new oil discoveries, and oil was to become the most fabulous source of wealth in world history. What uses for this black gold had recently been found with the use of Navy ships in the First World War, newly fueled by oil. Even more important, oil was needed to power the infant automobile industry, an industry to power which would become the heart of the American economy. Blacks in Greenwood had been asked to sell off their land long before the massacre, of course at prices far below their value, offers that were consistently rejected by the thriving community. The massacre was the white response to that rejection. So a pretext had to be found to force black people out. And so it was. Yet almost all narratives concerning the Tulsa events stress the pretext, which was a supposed violation of the sexual taboo, rather than the real causes. The irony is that had Greenwood not been destroyed, it would have collapsed within the decade anyway, along with the rest of Tulsa, the rest of Oklahoma, and the rest of the country, which would become mired in the economic crisis that began with the 1929 stock market crash. Tulsa, both black and white, along with the rest of Oklahoma, would meet the fate of the Okies in John Steinbeck's famous novel, The Grapes of Wrath, wiped out both by a series of great dust storms and the greatest economic storm in U.S. history, the Great Depression, when many of its people, driven by hunger, were forced to take to the road in a fruitless search for jobs and opportunity elsewhere. The Tulsa massacre needs to be understood within a greater national context. It was not an isolated outrage, but intimately connected to the political situation after the First World War, which was a time of resurgence of white supremacist violence, of the revival of the Ku Klux Klan, which became as powerful in the North as it was in the South, controlling many state legislators, both North as well as South. It was a time when it was deemed urgent to nip in the bud those weird notions about equality by African American veterans carried back from the war in Europe, where they had been recognized and decorated by the French government for their heroism, and where they had experienced respectful relations with the French people, having offered and in many cases given their lives supposedly to make the world safe for democracy. At home, the immediate post-war years were a time of ruling class hysteria caused by Russia's socialist revolution, setting in motion an early version of McCarthyism, the government running roughshod over civil liberties with raids and arrests of progressives and deportations of aliens, all for the crime of fighting for working people. Yes, the events in Black Tulsa were particularly horrific, but certainly no anomaly. U.S. history is strewn with examples of white mobs abetted by police setting upon peaceful African Americans, beating them, murdering them, such as New York in 1863, Memphis and New Orleans in 1866, Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, and again in New Orleans in 1900, right up to the riots of 1919. That notorious year shortly before the Tulsa Massacre, when black people were attacked in cities around the country and dubbed by historians the Red Summer, Chicago being the most bloody. Yes, the prosperity and independence of African Americans in Tulsa was indeed an anomaly. After all, Americans had not been dragged to this country in chains for the purpose of their becoming independent businessmen. They had been kidnapped at considerable expense to work on the land stolen from the indigenous, a highly arable land, rich in natural resources, with a hospitable climate, secure from the destructive wars in Europe. The only problem had been a shortage of workers. The indigenous could not fill this need, given their susceptibility to European diseases from which the great majority of them succumbed, but to which the Africans, for the most part, not entirely, had the misfortune of being immune. There's another myth, by the way, that Africans were completely immune to the heat and pestilences of southern swamps, but numbers of them perished too, just as had the indigenous. Africans, becoming African Americans over time, were the great wealth producers of the nation, producing not only crops, but desperately needed foreign exchange, hard money for a cash-starved economy. It was upon slavery.
Hold on, Joe. Hold on, Joe.
Sure.
Let's get into a little bit about what you were talking about.
Mhm.
You were talking about the context, right? The the historical situation of what was going on, because I'm hoping that before we end tonight, and maybe we'll have to have another show, we want to get into the context then, the context now, right? And what the situation is and how do we move forward. But first, let's understand, because you brought up a lot in a little bit of time, right? Let's step back a little bit. So what was happening at that time, right? The U.S. was coming out of World War I, and black soldiers had performed magnificently as part of the U.S. Army against the Germans, against the Austro-Hungarians, and the Turks in Europe. They were decorated in France. The French people were like, yeah, these are warrior heroes. And so African Americans in France got more respect in France than they were getting in the United States. Correct?
Right.
Okay. And at that same time, when they're coming back from the war, the Ku Klux Klan is the boss here, right? Woodrow Wilson, the great Democratic leader, was so sympathetic to the Klan that the Klan had a big march in Washington, D.C., right?
Right.
And at the same time, you had the socialist revolution in Russia, became the Soviet Union, who explicitly believed in the right of self-determination and fought against racism here and over there, right?
Right.
So you have these two forces. And so in the United States, the Klan is unleashed. The white supremacists are unleashed. And the 1919 is called the Red Summer, where different African-American communities are attacked, annihilated across the country. So this is the context of Greenwood. And now, to make matters worse, Oklahoma becomes an oil state where property values zoom. And so taking land away from black people in Oklahoma would serve the interest of the rich white people who are living there. So that's basically what we're talking about. It sounds like a powder keg for genocide. That's what it sounds like to me.
I think you summarized it very well.
Yeah.
Should I continue?
Right.
Oh, Bill, you want to say something?
No, go ahead. I'll wait. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So go ahead, Joe. I just wanted to, get the audience,
That's right.
So that we're all in the same place. What we're doing is setting up what was the situation, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Okay. All right. I won't be long. I just want to say one thing. The conversation we had last week gathered, and this time, the one common denominator is oil. We talked about that last Monday and this Monday. The common denominator is oil. American grief for oil. Okay, go ahead. What was that? You didn't hear me? I said
the common denominator was
oil. OIL.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, the same thing happened after the Second World War. Black troops coming home were lynched while they were in uniform, because it was very important, especially in the South, to make sure that they understood, these black veterans, that they may have been, being heroes abroad, but they're going to be back in their place right after the war. So so slavery was the economic foundations for this country, benefiting, by the way, not only Southern planters, but what people don't realize but also Northern shipbuilders involved in the slave trade, Northern merchants for whom the slave South was an important market, Northern factors getting North-South deals done, as well as insurance companies and bankers greasing the wheels of a slave-based commerce, all feasted on the enslaved's backbreaking labor. Fast forward. With the Northern victory in the Civil War came emancipation, largely gained through the efforts of, not Lincoln, but the enslaved themselves, which is another key fact, for the most part ignored, downplayed, or denied in the thousands of books written about the Civil War. The formerly enslaved thought emancipation meant freedom, meant citizenship, meant their labor would be directed toward supporting their own families. which was only possible through land ownership, something surely they had earned after 400 years of whip-coerced toil. Surely they had not expected to find themselves in virtually the same position of dependence on a landowning master as before. But this was asking too much of the northern elite, for whom the example of property being transferred from former owners to the laboring class was simply too dangerous to be allowed. Of course, Washington had no problem giving away millions of acres of land to railroad corporations. Government giveaways to capitalists violated no sacred principles. Meanwhile, the rebel planters were determined to reestablish as closely as possible the former conditions of their control, despite the bitter resistance of the newly freed. In this, the former rebels had the blessings of President Johnson, who, carrying out Lincoln's plan, I repeat, carrying out Lincoln's plan, was willing to just let bygones be bygones. The Southern elite thereupon instituted a reign of terror. Blacks were beaten or murdered by the thousands, a bloodbath that has yet to be adequately documented by historians. Laws were passed throughout the South, vagrancy laws aimed at forcing Black people to accept whatever terms of employment were offered to them. There was apprenticeship laws for Black children, a disguised form of slavery. There was heavy punishment for crimes thought to be the special province of the formerly enslaved, so that they could then be leased out as convict labor. All of this known as the Black Codes. And then, for reasons having nothing to do with concern for the newly free, having nothing to do with considerations of justice, but everything to do with fear that a resurgent Democratic Party was threatening to take back national power, a faction of the Northern capitalists took over in Congress, stripped the old Confederates of their power, and ushered in a period of hope for a true expansion of democracy, economic as well as political. The formerly enslaved were permitted some measure of power, including the right to vote, but again, not the right to the land. Later, faced in the North with an unprecedented militancy of its own so-called free white workers, who were talking about socialism and rising up in general strikes that had to be suppressed with military force, the Northern capitalists decided they had more to gain by allying with the landowners of the South than with the formerly enslaved. So a deal was struck, and the Southern planters were put back in the saddle, given a free hand to do as they pleased with what was called the Negro problem. Once again, the planter elite were faced with a choice. They could build a new South, as some Southerners urged, mostly from urban areas, based on modern capitalist principles, including scientific farming and mechanization, and developing an industrial base, or they could rely on the old system of the past, slightly modified in order to remain within the letter of the slavery outlawing 13th Amendment. It was decided that the most profitable course was to consolidate a type of semi-feudal regime, good for the landlords, but guaranteeing that the South would become a backwater, falling ever further in economic development behind the rest of the country. So the system of shackles known as Jim Crow was introduced, and of course, Black disenfranchisement, which, by the way, affected many poor whites as well, the purpose of which was not only to control the Black labor force, but to prevent an alliance between Blacks and the mass of poor white farmers, who themselves were victims of planter rule. Such an
Hold on a
alliance.
second, Joe.
Yep.
Hold on. We have Jose. Jose is joining us now. Jose, how you doing?
Good.
Yeah, would you like to say anything in terms of
Hey, Jose, how you doing, Jose?
the anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre? Jose?
No, it's a horrific. Just had. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
A horrific date. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes,
we
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. You know what? I'm just going to listen. Okay. I'm going to listen to Joe.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome anyway. I'm going to put you backstage, okay,
Thank you.
Jose, so you can listen.
Yes, that's good. I don't know how I snuck onto stage.
Yo, Bill, man, the bouncers ain't doing their jobs, bro.
Hey, Jose.
All right, go ahead, Joe.
So I was talking about the fear of the white
Yes, you do.
planters of a poor white alliance with black
I guess you
farmers.
got to talk with them.
Yeah.
And
Listen, hold on a second, Joe. I think at some point we got to talk about that, right? Because there were people asking me whether this kind of thing can happen again, right? We saw with the rise of Trump and the takeover of the Capitol building and this overt white nationalism. So at some point, I want you to talk about can this thing happen again, and what do we need to do to prevent it? But go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you anymore.
yeah, we can talk about that a little later. But this very important point about the alliance that they feared, the planters feared more than anything, an alliance between the poor black and poor whites. And actually, such an alliance would begin to materialize during the 1880s and 1890s in the movement known as populism. But ultimately, that movement sank on the reef of white racism, resulting not only in the continued oppression of African Americans, but also condemning the poor whites to fall far behind whites in the rest of the country in every measure of well-being, including wages, education, health, and life expectancy. Their only consolation was the color of their skin, a consolation purchased at the price of a life of unending misery. While there was some slow and spotty progress in agricultural mechanization in the South, it was only the Black Freedom Movement of the 50s and 60s, signaling that the days of rightlessness and super exploitation were coming to an end, that moved the planters to expel their tenants completely and replace them with machinery, causing another great exodus to the North, where extraordinarily versatile, creative, and resourceful black farm people were told that they, quote, had no skills, refused employment. The price for a minimum degree of welfare support for mothers and children was abandonment of the family by the father, which in turn was used to justify the slander that black men lacked a sense of family responsibility, and supposedly even going back to slavery days where there was no real black family unit, which is another slander. But getting back to Tulsa, what were black people doing in Oklahoma anyway? We go back to the end of Reconstruction, that brief period, as previously mentioned, when the dominant class in the North, operating through the Republican Party, needed the black vote to retain national power. But in 1876, as we mentioned, a deal was made between the great property owners of both North and South, whereby African Americans were thrown to the wolves as the great plantation owners, formerly in rebellion, were now made a junior partner in the great work of plunder of the farmers and workers of the nation, and then after that, the imperialist plunder of farmers and workers of the entire world. Underpinned by both state and vigilante terror, a new sharecropping system was established whereby the tenants, in exchange for the privilege of being rented a piece of land, were forced to use the landlord's services and at extortionate prices, forced to buy their food and other vital provisions at the landlord's store at extortionate prices, forced by economic necessity to ask for advances given at extortionate rates of interest, not allowed to market their own crops, and cheated on every hand. And finally, when it came time for the annual reckoning, lo and behold, it turned out that after a year's labor by the entire family, it was the sharecropper who owed money to the landlord. and woe to those who challenged the landlord's arithmetic. Their fate would be either a beating, death, or prison time. So the sharecropper had to work off the phony debt by another year's labor, after which the sharecropper turned out, by the landlord's calculation, to be in even deeper debt. Don't call it slavery, but use a more refined description: debt peonage. Deprived by violence of the right to vote, unable to receive justice in a racist court system, subject to flagrant extortion, black women preyed upon by white men with little ability to protect them, all hope for a better life in the South dashed and filled with despair, Southern blacks turned to plans for emigration to Liberia at first, sending out settlers there who only verified the impracticality of settlement where their presence was not appreciated by the indigenous Africans. Finally, eyes were turned westward to states eager for settlement, especially Kansas, scene of past bloody anti-slavery struggles associated with the name of John Brown. And so, despite enormous hardships, thousands managed to make the trek, the first major exodus to the north of former slaves. They were called exodusters. Meanwhile, whites, alarmed at losing their labor force, resorted to intimidation and even physically prevented them from getting on boats headed west. But again, most of those who did arrive in Kansas were disappointed in the opportunities available to them, as well as the harshness of conditions. Finally, a small number of Southern blacks sought other states for refuge, including Oklahoma. Of course, no one was concerned about the rights of the indigenous, the treaties with the government being just so many scraps of paper. After all, a civilized government is under no obligation to keep its promises to savages. So Oklahoma became dotted with independent black settlements. Tulsa briefly represented their greatest success story, inspiring Booker T. Washington, the great accommodator to Jim Crow, chosen by the white establishment to lead black people. It was he who dubbed Greenwood Negro Wall Street, confirming his teachings that it was perfectly possible for black people to achieve success along with systemic racism. The fact is, it was not a black Wall Street, for Wall Street controlled the economics and politics of the nation, while Greenwood did not, as the subsequent tragic events demonstrated, even control its own neighborhood. This is important to note, for there are voices that continue to claim that the road to black liberation lies through developing a black Wall Street, or at least admission to the boards of directors and top positions within corporate America. We use the commemoration of the Tulsa Massacre as an occasion to recommit ourselves to destroying every form of white supremacy, of which Tulsa was one of an infinite number of examples. Recommit ourselves to identifying and destroying the foundation of white supremacy, the exploitative social and political system which is oppressing not alone African Americans, but the great majority of all peoples, an economic and political system anchored in white supremacy. Such a struggle, the struggle to establish a new society truly worthy of human beings, requires focusing on and encouraging the leadership of those who have the most to gain in fundamental social change and the least to lose in uncompromising struggle, the working people, and especially the most exploited and oppressed of the working people, namely working people of color, and most of all, African American working people. But it also requires forging unity with all those suffering at the hands of the elite and their hired hands. And finally, that struggle will require correcting efforts of the past, which, while heroic and inspiring, failed to recognize the need for leadership roles by working women of color, without which no victory is possible.
Joe, usually what we do on the show is we take comments from the chat and then we try to address them. Bill, I don't know whether you wanted to say something now or you wanted to raise the comments from the chat first.
Nah, I didn't know that we was. I thought we was gonna like give and take a little bit. I didn't know I was gonna. There's so much that he said to digest. There's some things that I thought
It's a
about
lot.
that I probably forgot some of it along the way. So I'm gonna take the opportunity to speak now, so I won't forget more, because it's just so much to chew on. I want to come back to Joe. First of all, I want to say I think you did a fantastic job. Very well researched. And I commend you. But I want to come back to the reason why we're speaking about Wall Street today, Black Wall Street, as you will. Uh, is because it's the 100th anniversary of an atrocity that has occurred, as you so eloquently mentioned, more times than we care to remember in our lifetime, in a lifetime that started before us. And that's why when we did libation, we also incorporated the unborn children in the lifetime that is yet to be had. It will continue to. America, white America, has had a history, and you can also go back to England. You can go as deep as you want to, but not to go so deep as to lose the importance of why we're here talking about Black Wall Street today. Is the fact that um, people, as I said, they still hear the screams. They still smell the smoke. Imagine something that happened 100 years ago being so horrific. Just to put it on normal layman's term, that they probably still wake up. They probably still have nightmares. Maybe not as much and hopefully not as often as they once do, but it sins upon their fossil, their membrane, these atrocities. And no matter what we do, they ask for reparation. They asked for a $2 million reparation, which is pennies on the dollar. I can't think of her name. Abrams, what's her name? From Atlanta.
Stacey.
What I forget. I can't think of her name right now. Her and another
Stacey
and some
Abrams.
others was able to raise the $2 million. Thank you. They was going to be part of right. Thank you, Stacey Abrams and others raised the $2 million. But as of last Sunday, the 23rd of May, the three litigants realized that it's a drop in the bucket. Actually, 2 million is an insult. So they raised it to 50 million. So they decided that they wasn't going to be part of a demonstration. And I guess they felt, I don't want to speak for them, but I would just assume that they felt insulted because they didn't go through with their part of the commemoration. They could have did it minus the cash, and they could have used it as a platform to talk about the disparity and the discrepancy and the lack of movement and the insulting amount of $2 million that they were offering. And you said that Wall Street was going to collapse anyway because of the crash of the market. That may be true, but when you look at African American, the history, the resilience, the fight back, why welfare was created because of that same crash, the stock market crash. That was created because white people, once they lost their wealth, they didn't think life was worth living. They had multiple suicides. So the white government looked upon that and said, well, what are we going to do? Because this is happening to our brothers and sisters. White people would have been resilient. Our white brothers and sisters. Black people would have been resilient. We came into this country not as immigrants, but as forced kidnapped from our land, and so with our family splintered, and all these rules. You talk about peonage. I'm glad you brought that up because those that don't, they should look it up and spell peonage. Peonage. I'll spell it again. Peonage. And then a lot of times the people talk about it was being worse than slavery because when you had enslaved, it was to your benefit to make sure that they were healthy, that they could produce money for you. But once in Jeffrey's riots in 1910, because the heavyweight champion, a black man, they kept bringing people as called as the Great White Hope, was assaulted and injured and even killed because they couldn't beat him. Now you look at Rosewood in January 1st of 1923, another case of affluent black people. So I want to bring the focus, as great a job as you did do, Joe, back to today because I look at it as being a totem pole. The strongest part of any totem pole has to be the base. And who would you find at the base of the struggle? You will find people that look like me, black and brown people, because we have always had this struggle. We have always struggle has always become secondary to whatever the latest struggle is and the newest struggle. And no affront to, I'll use the Asians as an example. The Asian will tell you that they have been struggling for some time, but their struggle became really um full blown over the last year due to the then President Donald Trump. When you had the Muslim community that was Southern Asian going through their difficulty with being attacked as Muslim, you didn't see conventional Asians, if I will speak frankly, coming to their age, but now you do. But every struggle that the laws are getting passed, the first day of Biden's office, the anti-Asian bill, we still have a Lynch bill that's been trying to be passed for the last 50 years. And you got to say, why is that? Well, today is one of these days, and May 1st is one of those days that these come into a topic where people spend the time, they set aside the time, they stop what they're doing to discuss these things. And these things need to be discussed because whether it's homosexuality, LGBTQT, I don't know all the acronyms, but the gay community, and I think anybody should live their life however they deem that they want to. But their challenge is not as challenging as it would be, as difficult as it is, because I take these opportunities to bring to focus the black, the atrocity of the black, and the internal fortitude, the intestinal fortitude of African American. And these type of days, the 100-year anniversary, the 99-year anniversary, the 98th year that continue to be brought upon black, as a reminder of how much we should continue to thank the vanguards of the mother of these struggles, which is African Americans. And we incorporate the Chinese, we incorporate the Asians, because we incorporate the gay community, we incorporate anybody, and we welcome them all to embrace the struggle. But oftentimes, people only really want to see the struggle when it falls upon their door, and that is a shame. And let's take this opportunity for people to look at it from a humanistic standpoint, where we all, one voice is stronger than a singular voice. One fist is stronger than a finger. And we fight together and we take these opportunities to look within ourselves. What can we do? What are we doing? Are we doing enough? Why am I late to the party? What can I do to expedite things, to make things easier for all? We take these opportunities to stay focused, to look upon the 107-year Viola Fletcher, who's went through this and probably had struggle and trial and tribulation that she would not necessarily would have had to go through. And even if we do have the stock market, everybody's not going to fall a victim to it. And the generational wealth that was taken from them. And we look at how America has continued to empower people that don't look like us by putting the guns and weaponized and deputizing people. Let's not forget that, because enough is not mentioned to it. And we have to be thankful for people like Timothy Vay that brought this story back to the forefront, brought it back to life. Because poor again, white individual was founded the mind at the hands of Timothy DeVay, McVeigh, which brought brought to life our dormant stories to some, but not to all. So I just want to say that in summarizing today. And it's 9 o'clock, and on CNN from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, Jay-Z and my correction, LeBron James and Magic Carter has a 2 hour special on court Dreamland. And I haven't seen it. It's the first of its kind. So any attention that's brought to it, I say is good attention. And that's what I have to say. Thank you for your time, Mark. And thank you for your comments, Joe. I was really appreciate it.
Yep. I mean, we're at the hour mark, and thank you, Joe and Bill. We do have one comment in the chat from the audience. Jose put it up. So I did want to bring that up, and then we can start wrapping up the show. And Joe, before I put Jose's comment up, is there anything that Bill mentioned that you want to reinforce or that you want to address before I put up the comment from the chat?
I'd just like to say ditto and bravo, and I think he said what he said was very important. I have nothing further to add to that.
All right, so I'm going to bring up Jose. I want to bring up Jose's comment. It's from Jose. What about ideas of racial capitalism by Cedric Robinson? Joe, I think he's addressing that to you, but Bill, if you know what he's talking about, maybe you could also address it.
I'm not familiar with Cedric Robinson.
You, Joe?
Yes, well, yes, but it would be too much to go into now. He talks about a particularly black Marxism as opposed to European Marxism. But
what about next week, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure we got anything.
I would only say that I think the operative words are racialized capitalism, and that they are so inextricably connected that you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other.
I see what you're saying. Well, one of the foundations of capitalism is racism. So I hear what you're saying about that. But okay. Yeah, Jose says it's probably too much for this part of the show. So Joe, let's start wrapping up, and then I'll say a little something. We always let Bill sum it all up for us, wrap it up for us. But in parting, Joe, let's say this is a part one of our discussion. We're gonna need more time to have discussion. What would you like to tell us before we wrap up today's segment?
Well, it's a shame that the South won the Civil War. That's one thing I would mention. But no, I think I've said pretty much, except that bringing it up to the present situation, the atmosphere today, and the January 6th events, and all those things, I think are natural follow-up of this big, foundation that I think was laid. And maybe for the next program, we could talk about, contemporary, how everything that's been said relates to where we are today.
All right. So I don't know when the Political Education Committee meets, because they usually set up the topics and they reach out to people to come on the show, and then I do a follow-up. So I will reach out to the Political Education Committee of the People-Pueblo Party, because I think that Bill, I think you're dead spot on. This show here, starting to talk about the Tulsa Massacre, it can't be. We don't have enough time to really go into today, and I think you did a great segue into bringing us into today. But I'm thinking maybe the next show we do next Monday, we should pick up where Bill left off. And that should be the second part of today's show. But Bill, let me let you finish up and see what you think about that idea. But thank you, Joe, for being here. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Jose, and thanks to the audience. I know Malik is there. Some other folks are there. And Bill, take it away, man.
Yeah, I want to thank Joe for I'm coming on and being so prepared. I mean, I had to respect the amount of research that you put into it. It really showed it, and I mean, people can go back and look at this, and they can pick bits and pieces to dive into. So I want to thank you for that, Joe. And Mark, I just want to thank you for the foresight of the topics. I think today was a natural topic, given that today is actually the day of the anniversary. So it was kind of like a no-brainer. But I want people to just challenge yourself and look into some of these things. I mean, if you research one thing, it'll take you to the next thing. Look up uh, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, even the Gap Band. The Gap Band wasn't a local band. No, the Gap Band had many hits, um, and they got their name from that area. The cross section of Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. They took the first three letters and created the name Gap Band. It was in tribute to Oklahoma and them paying homage and not forgetting. So I mean, it's just a lot of symmetry. I mean, the struggle has never ended. It's always going to be there, but it's rewarding because we unearth certain things, and every victory that we get is hard fought, so it's well deserved. So never give up. And like I said, on the backs of our ancestors, that's why we do libation, because we know the lessons that they taught us is a template for us to move forward. So with that, I said, more power to the people, all power to the people, the People-Pueblo power straight ahead. Thank you.
You all, thank you all. We'll be here
See
next
you next week.
Monday. Yeah, we'll be here for part 2. All right, so all power to the
Thanks
people.
again.